we get into Chapter 7's lesson on curtain walls, I wanted to show some image examples of what those actually are. These are used in residential and commercial applications, and they're a great installation method for creating very large glass walls. They are called curtain walls because they hang like a curtain on the building, so not only are they structural, but you actually sort of need to account for the fact that your building essentially has a massive hole in the side of the building, and you're going to need to make sure that you can structurally account for that, usually with columns and beam systems. With that said, let's get into the chapter so that we can see how they act in Revit. And to give you a hint, curtain walls, as the name implies, in Revit are essentially just going to draw like a wall system. The thing that we're going to see different today is how curtain walls can embed in other walls, because as we were probably seeing with some of these examples, curtain walls on the front of buildings can be a small entryway or glass storefront area that cuts into a solid wall system. This is called embedding in Revit, where you draw a solid wall and then put the curtain wall inside of it. So in that sense, curtain walls will sort of act like doors and windows in that it will cut a hole in a wall in order to add those features. Those are going to be the curtain wall types that we're going to be using most today. Before even adding in any in for Chapter 7, we'll see we've actually already got some drawn in this project. These are all examples of curtain wall systems. And then these are example of using a curtain wall system to simulate a window system. Because curtain walls are made up of more simple elements, like the mullion and panel system, you can get a lot more sunlight and a lot more glass on the sides of your building while keeping a simpler structure. So let's add in our own. I'm starting on page 710. And we're going to start in the small conference rooms. We're going to be adding in some curtain wall systems on the top, which are going to simply act as a visual to allow for light to go into that room. And then we're going to add another one on the southern end where it will have a lot of light coming into the space, but we are also going to replace this door, the solid door in the solid wall, with a curtain wall door that will go in that same wall system. As with many things in Revit, we need to make sure that everything for the item that we've created and all the constraints for the item that we're about to create have been created before we actually get into drawing it. So we're going to start by creating a new type of mullion, which is those aluminum pieces that actually separate the chunks of glass or glazing. We can do this by going into our project browser, coming down to our list of families, coming down to the curtain wall mullions section, expanding the subtypes, and then we're going to duplicate the 2.5 by 5 rectangular mullion type. So I'm going to come up to duplicate. It's going to make the same name with a 2 at the end of it, and I'm going to just change that name to be a 2-inch interior frame. Now let's make adjustments inside of that rectangular mullion to actually fit that size. Because mullions and curtain grids and a lot of the curtain wall system methods are drawn by drawing on their center line, when we double click into that 2-inch interior frame, in order to make these adjustments, we need to adjust the dimension in one direction and the other direction so that these two numbers will add up to that 2-inch, and it is capable of going from that center point. So the width on one side will be 1 inch in one direction, and then the width in the other direction will be also 1 inch, and then that will give us our total 2-inch interior frame mullion. Also, the thickness of the mullion, which is the mullion's direction this way, is typically going to need to match the wall thicknesses that you're using, and since the wall thicknesses that we're using are 4 7/8 inch steel studs with gypsum, we're going to also make the thickness of the mullion 4 7/8 inch. Once you've adjusted those three numbers, we can click apply and OK, and we now have the mullion we will use. Next, we need to make the glass that's going to be used. We do not want to use the glass that is already built for us because that is 1 inch thick, which is very reasonable for an exterior glazing system, but it's very thick for an interior system. So, once again, in the families area, we're going to go to curtain panels. We're going to go into the system panel family, and we're going to duplicate the existing glazed panel, which is on our exterior fronts. And we will duplicate that, and we're going to call this one glazed interior. Same method, we will double click on that to open up its value. We're going to change its offset to 0, which will make the curtain wall glazing on the interior system sit perfectly in the center of the system instead of offset to the outside like our exterior ones are. And then, as I mentioned, the thickness will be reduced down to that 1/4 inch thick. And now we have the two subcomponents available to make our curtain wall system. Now we need to actually make the curtain walls based on those subsystems. So we're going to come up to the wall tool, and in the type selector, you're going to see that the curtain walls are all at the very bottom. We need to create a fourth type that we're going to be using for our interior. So we're going to go ahead and select the storefront type. We're going to edit type and duplicate it, and we will call it the interior window wall, and then click OK. Now we need to change the settings in here so that it reflects an interior curtain wall system as well as uses the curtain wall subcategories that we just got done creating. The function of this curtain wall that we just created is going to be an interior function, which will help us with scheduling and parameters later. We want to ensure that it does embed so that when we draw it inside of a wall, it will cut just like our doors and windows were doing for us. And here is that glass piece that we just made right before this, the curtain wall panel. Instead of being glazed, we want it to be that glazed interior. And then we're going to come down to vertical grid and horizontal grid to tell it how it will automatically create the spacing between the mullions, more specifically the grids that host the mullions on a horizontal and vertical axis. For our vertical count out, we're going to want to make it automatically make a grid and mullion system at the maximum spacing of 4 feet and adjust for that size of the mullion, which will mean that we won't have to do the extra math to find out what the distance is within the mullion areas in addition to the thickness of the mullions. And then for horizontal, we're going to keep it at fixed distance at 7 feet and also ensure that it is adjusting for that mullion size. When it automatically creates those mullions based on the spacings, it is going to create these mullion types based on the location on the curtain grid system that it is at. And these 6 we're going to need to update to that very first subfamily, the aluminum mullion that we created, to that 2-inch interior. So we will open up all 6 of these options, do the drop down, and do rectangular mullion 2-inch interior frame. The final item is going to be updating its assembly code, which is going to be C1010 100. We have now created all of the subparts of the curtain wall system we'll use on the interior, as well as applied them to the new interior window wall curtain wall system. So we can now click Apply and OK. Now we're going to set our constraints. Just like we do with walls. We're going to tell the curtain wall that it will start at that level 1, but we don't want it to go up to level 2. We want it to go a very specific height that we tell it to. So we're going to change the top constraint to unconnected. This will allow us to type in the exact height value that we want to set our walls. This works with walls as well as curtain walls. And we want that height to be 9 feet. Now we could draw on our first curtain wall. So I'm going to come down to the small conference room again, room 50, and I'm going to draw a curtain wall back here. We will be adjusting its length and location, but for now, just go ahead and make sure you are clicking on the center of the wall to the center of the wall on the right side. I'm doing mine at about 10 feet. And then you will see that curtain wall embed into that wall system. And then we'll end the tool so we can adjust it. And then we're actually going to make this curtain wall system go all the way from interior face of the conference room to interior face of the conference room. So we're going to go to Modify, use the Align tool, and then we're going to align the ends of the curtain wall to the edges of the walls. Remember, for the Align tool, to click on the item you want the item to move to first, and then click on the item that you want to move to that location. Now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom, but this side is going to need to have an entry as we proposed earlier when we were doing doors. Standard doors do not go in a curtain wall system. You're going to need to tell the curtain wall that one of the pieces of glass inside of it will become a door. So for now, let's just go ahead and select the single flush door going into the small conference room and delete it. And then once again, add in that curtain wall system. Doing the same method, ensure we've got the same constraints and types. I'm going to draw the curtain wall from edge to edge, align tool, select edges of wall and curtain wall, select edge of wall and then curtain wall, and then end the tool. So we've got our curtain wall systems in for the small conference room. I'm on page 7-14, step 27. We now need to adjust the curtain wall panels and mullions to actually host a door and have our typical sizing that we want. So as you see on the diagram on page 7-14, 7-2.8 in the middle of the page, we're going to get our section tool going. Section tool is found naturally under the View tab, but because it's used so often, you can also always access it in the Quick Access toolbar. Using either of those methods, I'm going to draw a section facing that small conference room. Your left to right distance won't really matter much as long as you can see the whole curtain wall system, as we can see mine is doing here, but to make our lives a little easier, I am going to pull the far clip offset so that we aren't seeing too many items other than just the thing that we're wanting to adjust. And then let's get into that section view. We can do that by either going in the project browser to the sections area and opening that section, or more quickly, we can just double click on the head of the section over here, which will open up the view like this. So as you can see that we're starting to put together on page 7-15, we're going to need to subdivide this specific panel up to be a little bit thinner so that we can add in the door system. But we don't want to just move one of these over, as we're just going to make uneven sizes of glass. So we want to add in one more curtain grid right here. So we're going to come up to the Architecture tab, do the Curtain Grid tool, which is the item that will host the mullions, and we'll want to switch to one segment. If we do all segments, it will try and cut the entire glass all the way through. We just want one segment so that we can add one singular vertical curtain grid in here. Don't worry too much about the location when you place it, because we're going to adjust that shortly. Now you can end that tool, and then we can adjust it. You cannot move mullions in Revit. This is a very important discussion. You cannot take a mullion, even if it's unpinned, and move it in any way. You have to move the curtain grids that are hosting those mullion items. So in order to get a hold of it behind this mullion, I'm going to hover my mouse over where I know that grid is behind this mullion, and I'm going to click tab, not hold it down, just click it until it tells me that I have a hold of that grid line, and then I will click with my mouse so that I can actually adjust that. When we move this grid, it will move the mullion that hosts it. We want to have a door in here that is going to be 3 foot wide, and so we need to adjust this dimension to account for that. If we were to just put in 3 foot wide, it would not account for those mullions, so we need to account for that by adding in half of the thickness of one mullion and the full thickness of the other, since that's where the temporary dimensions are going. If you recall, we made these mullions 2 inches wide, so if we account for the 2 inches here and the 1 inch here, that would mean that we would need to make this 3 foot 3 wide in order to have an actual 3 foot wide panel for our door. And then the last item before we get in that door is we have a tripping hazard here. Typically frame curtain walls are going to have mullions around the entire panel of glass so that it houses it. But because a door is going to be going here, we do not want this bottom mullion. So we want to select it and delete it, but before we can delete it, we will need to unpin it, as curtain grids and mullions that are automatically added for us are going to be pinned. So now we're going to unpin that mullion and then simply delete it. You can use the delete key, or you can use this X button at the top. Now a visual item that we want to update, this isn't really necessarily going to change the integrity of the wall. It is just odd to have this piece come all the way up and then cut this long horizontal mullion simply to make this small piece. So I'm going to select on this vertical mullion, and I'm going to click this button, which will toggle the mullion joint. The way that you add doors in Revit is simply by just going to the Architecture tab, starting the door tool, and placing in the wall, as we've discussed before. But curtain walls are a little different. I'm going to go back into level 1, and we need to tell this panel of glass that is sitting right here that it is not going to be a panel of glazing, that it is instead going to be a door. So I'm going to hover over that panel that I want to select. It's wanting to select the whole grid system, so I'm going to click tab, until it lets me only get a hold of that one panel. I'm going to unpin it, and then I'm going to come into the type selector and tell it to be the curtain wall single glass door. This is the one of the few times in Revit that we have to select the item and tell it to be a door instead of what it was. If your door came in swinging in an incorrect orientation, you can click these flip arrows until it is oriented like this, swinging up against a wall, which is the best space planning method for placing a door in a room. And then now we can delete away this section. We simply place this so that we can get this door and curtain wall system correctly oriented, so we can delete this. The curtain wall door that we just placed in the conference room is one of the ones that come with Revit, and it's fine on a very simple basis, but we have the actual door that is going to be going into this space with the actual details that will be used. So we're going to load in that door and then replace this door with it. So we're going to go up to the Insert tab, and we're going to go to Load Family and navigate to that folder of exercise files. It'll load into the Imperial Library first. You just need to go find where you saved the folder of exercise files. And when you get into the exercise files, it will be under Families. And the door we're going to need right now for this next step is going to be this FCO 200. And the door that you're going to need is going to be this FCO ending in 10394. I do want to note that in the book they do have these doors numbers reversed, so the 10394 is going to be the single door, which is actually what they meant to say on page 7-18, step 49. And then when we get into placing our double glass doors, we will need the one that is 10393. So I'm actually going to hold Control and click on the other one so that we will load both of these doors in, and then we can change that door out. So let's select that door that we just got done placing and go find that FCO 200 10394 door type. The specific model number is going to be the D200C002, so we'll select that, and then it will update to that more detailed door type. Graphically, it is showing the door as closed and open, but in reality, it is actually only modeled as closed, and then there is a visual property that allows us to see what the door would look like when it opens so that we can see the swing of the door. We actually want to modify how many of these are showing in each view, so with that door selected, we're going to come up and we're going to edit the family. We won't make any actual changes to the door itself, we're simply just going to change the way that it shows in different view types. So with the 3D door shown in the edit door type style, we're going to select the entire door system as we see it right now. Because we're in 3D, we're only selecting the door as it actually three-dimensionally is modeled. So when we do this drag selection, we're actually not selecting this visual property showing that it is in a swing with detail lines. So in that edit door, with the door entirely selected, we're going to come over to the properties, and we're going to select its visibility settings, which can be found right here with the visibility graphics overrides. What we're modifying right now is which views in our project the parts that we have selected will be viewed. This three-dimensional model of the door we do not want to be shown in Plan RCP or when it is cut in Plan RCP. That's going to make it so the model door will be seen in all 3D views and elevation views, but when we are viewing it in a plan view or in a ceiling plan view, it will not show the model door, it will only show that swinging door opening that was drawn with detail lines. So now we can click OK, and then with that one property changed, we're going to load it into our project again, and then we will override the existing version. As I mentioned, now we aren't seeing the 3D modeled door in the plan view, we are simply only seeing the swinging representation of the door that was drawn inside of that family. Using those same techniques of drawing the curtain wall systems and then drawing curtain wall systems that will have doors inside of them, and then drawing a section so that you can look in the direction of those doors, you need to go and do the lunchroom staff room on the right side of the building over here. And after creating the space for that door, you're going to add in that double door. I'm going to select that double door that's in the staff lunchroom, delete it, architecture tab, wall, interior curtain wall system. And looking at page 7-21, figure 7-2.21, I'm going to create the interior curtain wall system in here, align, and then draw our section. This isn't looking too far and showing anything else, so I don't really need to adjust this, but just for practice, I will pull that back. Double click on the section head to open up our section, and then make the changes as required in page 7-21, 7-22, and 7-23. I'm going to hover over the center mullion. I'm going to unpin it and delete it. And because this is where our double door is going to go, we also need to unpin and delete these bottom two mullions. You will still see, although that we did remove the mullions, there is still a split in the glass here, and that's because this curtain grid is telling the curtain wall system to split it whether or not there's a mullion or not. So I'm going to select that curtain grid, I'm going to unpin it, and then I'm going to remove a segment of this curtain grid. I still want this top mullion and curtain grid to exist. I just don't want this bottom curtain grid to exist. So with Add Remove Segment selected, I'm going to select on the lower part of the curtain grid system and click, and then it will make that one large continuous piece of glass. As with before, we're going to want to adjust how these mullions are adjusting to each other. So I'm going to select that mullion above, and I'm going to click on its bottom part for the join mullion so that it keeps one continuous mullion system above the door. Now we need to adjust the panel to be the correct size for the door. You cannot select a panel and adjust its size as you might be able to do with walls and editing door types. We need to simply adjust the curtain grids and the mullions that are going to host it. So I'm going to hover over the left mullion, and I'm going to click Tab until I can select the curtain grid that hosts it, and I'm going to unpin it. If we want this panel to be 6 foot wide, that would mean that the distance from its center to the center of the mullion will need to be 3 foot 1 to account for a 3 foot wide door on the left side of this double door, as well as the 1 inch for that mullion thickness. So I'll change this to 3-1. And then I'll do the same on the right side. Hover over the right vertical mullion, tab to be able to select an item under the assumed item, unpin, and then 3 foot 1. We now will have a 6 foot wide panel, so we can select this panel and then change it to the door type. We changed it in floor plan view before. I just want to demonstrate that we can also do this in the elevation view by tabbing and then selecting that panel as we would do in the floor plan, unpinning it, and then changing it to that double door. There are 3 different types of the double door dependent on how wide of a bottom rail we want it to be, and we're just going to change it to the 6-inch bottom rail. Now if we go back to level 1, we'll see that the way that this door was developed does not show the modeled door and the detail of the door swing in the plan view, so we don't need to edit the family like we did for the single door. That is all the information that you need in order to get in all of your curtain walls and your curtain walls with doors in the remainder of the project. So using those same techniques, please refer to page 7-25, 7-26, and 7-27 to get in the remaining curtain wall systems. Remember, the flow of your process will be getting the architecture tab and wall tool going in the floor plan view, drawing your interior window wall wherever your curtain wall systems are, aligning it to the edge of the walls as necessary, drawing in a section in order to be able to look at those systems if you need to adjust the mullions. And if anything is not letting you move or adjust its types, be sure you are unpinning them in order to get a hold of them. This is definitely going to be a chapter where the tab button, in order to cycle through the different options of things that you can select, are going to be very helpful. And when you are done, you have finished chapter 7.